welcome everyone to this second meeting of the Tea Time with Bacon series on the Opus Maius and the sciences. And today we have Alexander Fidora here with us, who is a research professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And I'm sure you all know him already, so I don't really have to say much, but I think one of the things we know him from, of course, is his work on the 12th century and general medieval theory of science and the divisions of sciences. So we are very lucky to have him here today talk about these issues related to Bacon. And as I said already, the talk is going to be recorded, but not the Q&A. So after the 30-minute talk, we'll have the Q&A session. And maybe already let me say that if you have any questions, please then write, like after the talk, quickly question or follow up in the chat. Don't write your full question, just question or follow up, and then I'll try to give you the stage once it's your turn. Okay, and then I suppose we could start. So I'll give the floor to Alexander.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and thank you very much to the organizers of this tea time for inviting me, for having me, to the Roger Bacon Society, Research Society in general, and to all of you who want to spend this Friday afternoon together with us on Roger Bacon and the division of the sciences in Opus Maius 412, particularly focusing on Roger Bacon's sources and their transformation. I have prepared a PowerPoint, which I'm going to share with you. In a minute. Should appear now. Okay. Let me start with a brief introduction. Scholarship on Roger Bacon has emphasized repeatedly the importance of mathematics within his thought, and more specifically for his epistemology. While Bacon did not delve into mathematical theory as such, he was very interested in mathematics and its usefulness for the remaining sciences. In fact, Bacon claimed that mathematics was key to understanding all other disciplines. This epistemological interest in mathematics is not exclusive of Bacon. Rather, it sets Bacon in the context of a wider debate of his time regarding the certainty of the speculative sciences, that is, natural philosophy, mathematics, and metaphysics. In the 1230s, Richard Rufus brought up the question in his Memoriale Questionum in Metaphysica Aristoteles, namely whether mathematics or metaphysics should be considered the most certain science. That the issue was controversial among Bacon's contemporaries is confirmed by a remark in Robert Kilwoodby's De Ordo Scientiarum from approximately 1250. Here, Kilwoodby outlines the following scenario. In this order, he's referring to speculative philosophy, wherein physics undoubtedly succeeds metaphysics and mathematics, one person might say that mathematics precedes metaphysics because of the most certain demonstrations that obtain in the former. A different person, however, might claim the opposite, since metaphysics is the supreme part of philosophy and therefore its principles must be self-evident and have the power to explain the common principles of the particular sciences. And perhaps, Kilwoodby says quite diplomatically, each of these statements is true. In what follows, I wish to analyze Bacon's approach to this question as laid out in his Opus Maius, Book 4, Distinction 1, where he devotes 2 of the initial chapters to this question, that is, to the epistemological status of mathematics vis-a-vis the other sciences. Chapter 2 of Book 4, Distinction 1, is entitled In quo probatur per auctoritatem quod omnis scientia requirit mathematicam. And chapter 3 is entitled In quo probatur per rationem quod omnis scientia requirit mathematica. While the latter seems more promising, that is, the chapter where it is proven by means of reason that mathematics has a certain preeminence, while this chapter seems more promising for a systematic analysis of Bacon's own position, I will nonetheless focus on the former, that is, the chapter Per Auctoritatem, as it offers crucial insights into how Bacon received and transformed the traditional division of the sciences, which is at the center of my attention in this paper. As you will see, I will say something about whether mathematics is crucial and why for the other sciences, but my main focus, this is a kind of pretext, a kind of excuse, my main focus will be on analyzing how Bacon describes the division of the sciences in this chapter 2. I start with my first point, that is essential versus accidental modes of philosophy. Chapter 2 of Opus Maius 4.1 builds on a macro division of philosophy into what is called its essential and accidental parts, trying to show that every discipline contained under these two parts depends on mathematics. Under the essential, or among the essential parts of philosophy, Bacon counts natural philosophy, mathematics, and divine science. For the accidental counterparts, Bacon mentions grammar and logic. For the essential parts of philosophy, Bacon further refers his readers to Aristotle's classification of theoretical philosophy in Metaphysics 6, which is indeed the locus classicus for the division of theoretical philosophy into physics, mathematics, and metaphysics. Aristotle's original text, Metaphysics 6.1, does not speak, however, does not mention essential modes of philosophy as Bacon does. It was, in fact, Michael Scott in his Arabic translation of Metaphysica 6.1 who applied or who coined the expression modi essentiales for the three parts of Aristotle's theoretical philosophy, speculative philosophy. Yet, and this is important, no reference whatsoever is found in any of Aristotle's works, not in Greek, not in Arabic, and not in Latin, to a corresponding accidental mode of philosophy, which, as I have said, Bacon also mentions. The idea of an accidental part of philosophy that Bacon uses is not, in fact, an integral part of the Aristotelian tradition. This doctrine, rather, is characteristic of the so-called introductions to philosophy from the first half of the 13th century. That is, propedeutic treatises written for the purpose of teaching at the arts faculty in Paris, which offered definitions of philosophy along with a division of its parts and their relation, a description of their relation among each other. While introductions to philosophy were neglected for a long time, the additions of a series of such introductions by Claude Lafleur and others has confirmed their significance. In fact, these texts, the introductions to philosophy, allow us to assess the self-understanding of philosophical matters and the self-understanding that the masters of philosophy had during the first decades of the arts faculty at the University of Paris. Elaborating upon Aristotle's metaphysics, the authors of these introductions, in fact, completed the division of essential philosophy introduced by Michael Scott by supplying the corresponding category of accidental parts. The anonymous Parisian introduction Sicut Recitat Avicenna, for instance, from the middle of the 13th century, explains the case as follows. As Aristotle says that there are three essential modes of knowing, that is, the natural, the mathematical, and the divine one, he seems to imply with this that the other three are accidental, namely grammar, logic, and rhetoric. You see what happens here. These masters of philosophy were reading Michael Scott's Latin translation of the Metaphysica, there they found the expression modi essentialis applied to the speculative sciences or disciplines of philosophy. And they say, as the anonymous author of Citat Avicenna does, well, with this, Aristotle calling these sciences essential or disciplines essential modes of philosophy, he suggests or he implies that the others, namely grammar, logic, and rhetoric, are accidental modes of philosophy. Bacon's division of philosophy, and this is the first result of the paper I'm giving today, so you see I'm going quickly to the results, but there will be more. Bacon's division of philosophy into essential and accidental parts, which provides the general structure of Opus Maius 4.1.2, clearly reflects this well-established view at the Paris University and particularly at the Faculty of Arts. I'm coming to my second point, mathematics and the essential modes of philosophy. I will now go through mathematics and the essential modes of philosophy, what Bacon has to say in this regard. And then in a third part of my paper, I will subsequently deal with mathematics and the essential and the accidental modes of philosophy. Starting the discussion of the relation between mathematics and the remaining essential modes of philosophy, that is natural philosophy and divine science, Bacon first alludes to a famous passage from the introduction to the Almagest, wherein Ptolemy claims, and I quote, it's a very famous passage, Ptolemy says that only, the quote, mathematics can provide sure and unshakable knowledge to its devotees. According to Bacon, this passage establishes the fundamental role of mathematics vis-à-vis physics and metaphysics. The same view, this is interesting, was entertained by other 13th century authors who argued on very similar lines in favor of mathematics. Thomas Aquinas, for instance, in his commentary on Boethius de Trinitate, question 6, article 1, also drew on Ptolemy's introduction to the Almagest to make the same point. From here, Bacon moves in chapter 2 rather unexpectedly. Those of you who had the occasion to read the text will remember he moves rather unexpectedly to practical philosophy and to Boethius, the second principal authority of his argument concerning mathematics and its specific status among the essential parts of philosophy. At this juncture, Bacon's argument becomes interesting. I say this because the use of Ptolemy to say that mathematics is superior in a certain sense to metaphysics and to physics, this is quite a common argument that, as I've said, we also find in Aquinas and other authors. Now, that Bacon addresses practical philosophy in this context is something new, I think, and interesting. For what reason, one may ask, does Bacon discuss practical philosophy among the essential modes of philosophy, which actually correspond to Aristotle's theoretical disciplines? The reason for Bacon to do so is the twofold nature of divine science, as he says. And I give you a quotation from Bacon. You will see that I don't give many quotations from Bacon, hoping that some of you had the occasion to look into the text, but I summarize his views and rather prefer to offer you quotations from the other authors that I want to put in dialogue with him. So why does Bacon introduce practical philosophy in his discussion of the essential modes of philosophy and their relation to mathematics? Well, he says there is a twofold divine science, as is clear from Metaphysics 1, namely first philosophy and civil science. Basing himself on Aristotle's book, Metaphysics, book 1, and more concretely, chapter 2, 983a5, Bacon in his Opus Maius claims that divine science embraces both first philosophy or metaphysics, sensu stricto, and civil science, which concerns, he says, the divine cult, among others. It is in this context that he quotes at length, and not only by allusion, as in the case of Ptolemy, to which I have just referred, that he quotes a passage from Boethius De Institutione Arithmetica, Book 2, Chapter 45. I will not discuss this text, which offers an interesting reflection on the various forms of statehood in terms of mathematical proportion, or rather participation, as we would say today. The text is indeed interesting, and I have not seen any other author quoting this text. But rather than going into this now, I would like to draw your attention to the Aristotelian passage, which allows Bacon to introduce the practical disciplines and more specifically civil science into the essential modes of philosophy. In fact, Metaphysics 1, 2, 983a, 5-7 is itself a problematic text, allowing for various interpretations. The text, which you have here in the translation from Loeb's Classical Library, suggests that divine science is called so in two ways, namely with regard to that science or knowledge which belongs to God alone, and to that which has God as its subject of study. It is worth noting that Aquinas would also refer to this very same passage in his commentary on Boethius De Trinitate. However, Aquinas offers a very different reading of the text, a very different interpretation of the text, namely one that grounds his distinction between revealed theology on the one hand and metaphysics on the other. In contrast, Bacon's interpretation of the passage is close to some of his Arabic authors, such as Al-Farabi and in particular Avicenna. The final chapters of Avicenna's Metaphysics, these chapters play an important role in Bacon's Philosophia Moralis, establish a systematic link between divine science on the one hand and politics and ethics on the other hand. Consequently, Bacon substantially transforms the category of essential philosophy, which the early masters of philosophy identified with Aristotle's speculative sciences. While it served originally to classify the different branches of theoretical philosophy, it now, in Bacon, includes practical philosophy as well. That this transformation is not accidental is confirmed by another text by Bacon, namely his Summae Dialectices from the 1250s. In this text, which is strongly dependent on Parisian teachings, philosophical teachings from the arts faculty, Bacon briefly presents the division into essential and accidental modes of philosophy, which he describes as follows. Quite an interesting text as well. According to some, grammar, logic, and rhetoric are parts of the trivium and accidental modes of philosophy, which latter are concerned with the science of the things such as speech. Natural philosophy, mathematics, and mechanics, and moral philosophy are essential modes, and they are the principal parts of the quadrivium. Personally, I'm not sure whether mechanica, really belongs into this text. Rather, I think this is a slip either by a copyist or by the editor, and that the text should read metaphysics. Natural philosophy, mathematics, and metaphysics, and moral philosophy are essential modes. However that may be, what is unmistakably clear from the passage is that Bacon was very serious about including practical or moral philosophy among philosophy's essential modes. Although this goes against the standard division of philosophy in the 13th century, I have been able to pin down at least one text that could have inspired Bacon, namely the anonymous introduction to philosophy, Philosophica Disciplina, from approximately 1245. And I've brought this text for you. This is an introduction, anonymous introduction to philosophy, where we read, in a different way, the speculative philosophy of things is divided by Aristotle in Book 6 of his Metaphysics, where he says that philosophy has three essential modes: natural philosophy, mathematics, and divine science. The other mode being accidental. This is what we have seen before. And now the author adds, divine science is twofold. Divine science, which he just said, is a part of the essential modes of philosophy. Divine science is twofold, as Aristotle insinuates at the beginning of his metaphysics. Either it deals with God and the divine substances, like metaphysics, or it deals with that which disposes humans correctly and allows them to rejoin divine goodness and rejoice in it. Disposing, the word disposing, refers to the virtues and the happiness in this life, while rejoining refers to beatitude and happiness in the other life. The accidental mode of philosophy, in turn, refers to the speech-related disciplines. Like Bacon, this anonymous author places practical philosophy among the essential modes of philosophy, drawing on the same text from Aristotle's Metaphysics 1:2 that we have come across in Bacon. It must be noted that this position, as I have already said, is quite unique. It is clearly opposed to all other 13th century introductions to philosophy, none of which counted practical philosophy among the essential modes of philosophy. Usually, these introductions treat practical philosophy as a discipline sui generis. So they do not assign it neither to the essential modes nor to the accidental modes. There is one exception, which is Arnold of Provence, famous Parisian master from the middle of the 13th century, who explicitly holds the very opposite view to Bacon and to this anonymous introduction, saying that practical philosophy, if it has to be included under the division into essential and accidental modes of philosophy, clearly belongs to the accidental modes of philosophy. None of these arts masters at the Faculty of Arts in Paris ever describes practical philosophy as part of the essential modes of philosophy, with the very exception of this text that I have just shown you and read out here from the Philosophica Disciplina. Against the background of the 13th century introductions to philosophy, there can be no doubt that Bacon's division of the sciences in Opus Maius 4:1-2 is very much indebted to the Parisian masters, as one can already see by the use that he makes of the division into essential and accidental modes of philosophy. Yet it is no less true that Bacon did not simply follow the mainstream, but pushed for a reorganization of the essential modes of philosophy in order to integrate practical philosophy along with metaphysics, whether inspired by his Arabic sources or more directly by this text from the Philosophica Disciplina and its peculiar notion of a twofold divine science. Bacon's reinterpretation, which is not void of systematic tensions, can be considered characteristic of his overall thought. The idea to reproach practical philosophy and metaphysics. Coming to my third point, mathematics and the accidental modes of philosophy. In his analysis of the relation between mathematics and the accidental parts of philosophy in Opus Maius 4:1-2, Bacon refers his readers no less than 4 times to Al-Farabi and his treatise De Scientiis, a text which, as you know, exerted a strong influence during the 13th century and was actually translated twice in Toledo. According to Bacon, Al-Farabi had shown in De Scientiis that the accidental modes of philosophy, and in particular grammar and logic, now we'll come back to this, Bacon focuses, those of you who have read the text will have noticed, Bacon focuses on grammar and logic. He says that the accidental modes of philosophy, and in particular grammar and logic, were dependent on mathematics. Although Bacon does not quote a specific passage from Al-Farabi's work, the following lines from the logic chapter of De Scientiis may be at the origin of his argument. Al-Farabi says in the Latin translation, according to Gerard of Cremona, which is the one used by Roger Bacon, And this art, that is logic, is related to the art of grammar. And this is so because the relation between logic and reason, or the objects of reason, is like the relation between grammar and language, or the words. This art is also related to the science of al-horot, that is prosody. In fact, the relation between the science of logic and the intelligibles is like the relation between al-horot, prosody, and the rhythms of a verse. Similarly to all the rules that the science of al-horot offers us regarding the quantity of verses, the science of logic offers us rules for the objects of reason. Further, the rules of logic resemble the weights, and I think Yael will speak about science of weights in July, resembles the weights and measures. They are like the rules by means of which one tests the lines. The rules of logic are like the rules by means of which one tests the lines. This passage in Al-Farabi draws several analogies, namely between logic and grammar, and between logic and the science of al-horot, that is to say prosody, and the science of weights, measures, and finally geometry when speaking about the lines. Bacon offers, I think, his particular reading of these analogies, which he seems to understand not as analogies, but as systematic interdependencies between these sciences. Thus, focusing on the analogy between logic and prosody, Bacon, in Opus Maius 4.1.2, claims that the musico-mathematical categories of meter and rhythm are fundamental for both grammar and logic. That's his argument to say, or that's his argument for saying that grammar and logic need that grammar and logic have a mathematical foundation in so far as they need the categories of meter and rhythm. While this is a somewhat forced interpretation of Al-Farabi, I think, Alain Gallonier has pointed to a paragraph in the poetic chapter of the Sciences, which does indeed establish a more systematic link between poetical language with its meters and rhythms and logic. Here, Al-Farabi holds that in order to move one's soul to action, poetical language needs to be not only beautiful, but it also must incorporate elements from logic. This is the passage. For this reason, Al-Farabi says, that is, in order to move one's soul to action, poetical speech, in contrast to all others, is endowed with beauty, grace, and subtlety, and with elegance and clarity by means of all that is said in the science of logic. Bacon's argument in chapter 2 puts a different accent, however. In his understanding, it is not poetics that is in need of logic, so as to be able to achieve its perfection, but rather, for Bacon, logic finds its perfection in poetical and rhetorical language, since its ultimate goal, the ultimate goal of logic, is to produce arguments which move the practical intellect to faith and to the love of the virtues and of future happiness. For this purpose, Bacon says, logic has to strive for the beauty of language, which Al-Farabi describes in his chapter on poetics, along with the meters and rhythms. On the whole, and in spite of his emphatic references to Al-Farabi, Bacon's use of the De Sciences is rather idiosyncratic, I think. It offers a very personal interpretation of De Sciences in the attempt to argue for the dependence of grammar and logic on philosophy. According to Bacon, logic has to move the practical and not the theoretical intellect. And for this purpose, it needs poetics and rhetoric, which in turn are based on musico-mathematical notions such as meter and rhythm. This entails, in my opinion, a significant extension of the ends of Aristotle's poetics and rhetoric to the realm of logic. The reappraisal of poetics and rhetoric, which is characteristic of Bacon's thought, also explains why in the present chapter rhetoric is not mentioned as a distinct science contained among the accidental modes of philosophy. Bacon just speaks, and I've said this before, Bacon just speaks of grammar and logic when addressing the accidental modes of philosophy. As Jerry Hackett has argued, such a division reduced the truth-bearing capacity of rhetoric and poetics, opposing them to grammar and logic. Instead, Bacon advocated an integrated concept of grammar, rhetoric, logic, and poetics, which was oriented towards practical or moral philosophy, that the omission of rhetoric in Bacon's account of the accidental modes of philosophy is far from contingent, is corroborated by the following passage in the Opus Tertium. And this passage is not on my slides. I'll just read it out as I have it here. In Opus Tertium, Bacon says, "It is clear that logic and grammar are accidental sciences and not the principal ones." So both in the Opus Maius and in the Opus Tertium, Bacon, when speaking of the accidental modes of philosophy, by which the Parisian masters traditionally understood grammar, logic, and rhetoric, both in the Opus Maius and the Opus Tertium, Bacon reduces this to grammar and logic, removing from the list rhetoric. On Bacon's account, rhetoric and poetics, rather than being concerned with the non-logical and non-truthful aspect of speech, provide the link between the accidental modes of philosophy, that is for him grammar and logic, and the highest mode of essential philosophy, that is for him practical or moral philosophy. Consequently, in Bacon, a proper discussion of rhetoric and poetics is found not among the modes of accidental philosophy, as one would expect following the Parisian arts masters, but in the 7th section of the Opus Maius, that is, in the Moralis Philosophia, where Bacon explicitly says that rhetoric and poetics are parts of moral philosophy. I come to my conclusion. The close reading of Opus Maius 412 has shown how Roger Bacon transformed his Latin and Arabic sources in a very creative manner. Discussing the epistemological status of mathematics, he developed his own division of the sciences within the framework of some of the most influential epistemological accounts of his time. That is, the introductions to philosophy by the Parisian arts masters and Al-Farabi's De Sciences. While Bacon took inspiration from both these texts, his emphasis on the practical or moral dimension of the various parts of philosophy must be considered his personal imprint. As a result of this practical turn in his epistemology, Bacon adds one discipline to the 3 essential modes of philosophy, while omitting another one from the 3 accidental modes. And I've summarized this in a very schematic way, but which I think makes it very clear. The essential parts of philosophy for the Masters of Arts at the faculty in Paris, at the University in Paris, were physics, mathematics, and metaphysics. Bacon keeps these, but adds as a 4th part practical and moral philosophy to the essential parts of philosophy, while among its counterparts, that is accidental modes of philosophy, he removes one of the traditional parts of these modes, namely rhetoric and also poetics, which the Parisian art masters were not so much interested in. He removes that from the list. Most striking is, without doubt, Bacon's inclusion of practical philosophy among the essential modes of philosophy, which contrasts with the mainstream of the contemporary introductions to philosophy, although, as I have noted, one such introduction, namely the anonymous Philosophica Disciplina, explores a similar approach. Yet, not less telling is Bacon's omission of rhetoric from the list of the accidental modes of philosophy. Also, in this context, one can observe the crucial role of practical philosophy, which provides the ultimate horizon for grammar and logic. The goal of grammar and logic is to move the practical intellect. For this purpose, they need to be perfected by rhetoric and poetics, which Bacon therefore considers to be parts of practical philosophy, not of the accidental modes of philosophy. It is certainly true, and this is the conclusion of my conclusion, it is certainly true, as has been noted many times, that Bacon's curricular program launches a harsh critique of contemporary academic learning. Yet, it is not disconnected from the teachings at the University of Paris. Rather, the foregoing analysis shows, in my eyes, how some of the most salient features of Roger Bacon's epistemology, such as the rapprochement of moral philosophy and metaphysics, or the reappraisal of rhetoric and poetics, how these features were developed in a dynamic dialogue with the philosophical discourse of his day. I thank you very much for your attention.